Dan and Laura seemed like the perfect couple, but there was more behind the facade of their relationship than one could imagine. This is a story about love, loss, and unexpected twists that make you reconsider everything you believed in and find answers where you least expect them.
Dan, here's the situation. My relationship with my ex-wife isn't like the ones most of you have with your spouses. When I first met Laura, she was undoubtedly the most beautiful and mesmerizing woman I had ever encountered. We met at university while I was pursuing an undergraduate engineering degree, and we dated on and off for over a year before I asked her to marry me for the first time. Being with her made it nearly impossible to breathe. She truly took my breath away, showing just how captivated I was by her. I couldn't take my eyes off her, believing that everything she did was flawless. In my view, she was nearly perfect. However, there was a significant flaw. Not everything was perfect, beyond my own biased perspective. The fantasy I had of her was vastly different from reality. When I proposed to Laura, she declined. I recognized the rejection and decided to abandon the idea of a life together, moving on instead. We still dated occasionally, but I no longer expected us to be a couple. Women like Laura have a way of getting under your skin, much like an annoying itch that doesn't go away easily, even when you want it to. They can be somewhat addictive, similar to the 2 cups of coffee I need every morning to function. 1 cup gets me by, but I really prefer 2. Laura was like that. Spending time with her was better than not spending time with her or with anyone else. I needed a certain amount of her presence to get through my day. It's hard to explain, but if you've ever been obsessed with something, you know what I mean. It defies explanation and logic. It just exists. The issue with Laura was something that couldn't be resolved in a meaningful, lasting way. She was the woman I wanted, but I knew she wasn't good for me. The problem was that Laura was biologically unable to be monogamous. It sounds pretty ridiculous, doesn't it? I thought so too, and I still do. However, Laura was convinced that she couldn't survive without having intimacy with multiple partners. It took me a long time to come to terms with that. Believe me, I thought she was mentally ill. The idea of tolerating that kind of behavior in a committed relationship was completely foreign to me. So, I started dating other women and continued searching for the right person. During this time, I met several potential partners. Over about 2 years, I found at least 5 women who I thought could be great life partners, but for various reasons, none of those relationships worked out. 2 of them were particularly needy and wanted to plan our lives together from the moment we became intimate. They were already deciding how many children we would have, where we would live, the design of our home's curtains, and what special dishes we would use for occasions. That was all too overwhelming and too fast for me, so I moved on carefully, believing in not burning bridges unless it was necessary for a better long-term outcome. A few of the women were very casual and made it clear that marriage wasn't something they were interested in. I enjoyed spending a few months with them before moving on. One woman was especially different. She decided she wanted to become a priest in the Episcopalian Church. Her sudden calling to God was unexpected, but I suppose you should do whatever truly makes you happy. The strange part for me was that she was very wild in bed. After a night with her, I was exhausted and needed the next day to recover. But her devotion to her faith was her true passion, so it was all right. I initially thought her religious calling was just a unique way to end the relationship, but when I saw her a few months later, her conservative dressing and changed demeanor showed it was genuine. Oh well. During these tumultuous relationships, I still kept in touch with Laura and would meet her at clubs or other places. She was also going through a series of brief relationships, lasting from a few days to a few months each, before moving on to someone new. I was focused on my education and decided to prioritize that. After graduating with a Bachelor of Engineering degree, I got a job in the Seattle area and started working. It didn't take long for me to realize that I wanted more, so I took 2 years off. I'll share more about that later. Upon returning to Seattle, I resumed my position at the same company where I had previously worked. In some respects, it felt like I never left. However, things had changed. I hadn't been home even once in the past 2 years. My schedule was too packed, and I hadn't seen or spoken to Laura during that time. Honestly, after she rejected me, I decided it was time to move forward. I understand when I'm not wanted. This marked the beginning of a new chapter for me. My goals were to become an excellent engineer, earn a substantial income, and hopefully meet someone special to build a family with. That was my aspiration. But life doesn't always go as planned. A few months after settling back in Seattle on a Friday night, I went out for happy hour at a downtown spot known for attracting people willing to pay premium prices for drinks and food just to be seen at the trendy venue. Since I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment downtown and could easily get an Uber home, I decided to have a good time and maybe meet a nice woman. To my surprise, I ran into Laura. She inquired about what was happening in my life. I provided a brief overview, omitting the more detailed aspects. Her expressions and remarks were intriguing, giving me the sense that she was mentally noting everything for future reference. I suspected she might think I was a lonely loser struggling to meet women. Unexpectedly, Laura called one night and asked to visit. I was amazed to realize she had kept my cell phone number for nearly 3 years. I hadn't changed it, even when I moved to Canada, since international rates were exorbitant, and it was cheaper to maintain my US number and plan. I thought, why not? And invited her over. I found a bottle of wine to serve and quickly tidied up the kitchen and living room. My place wasn't large, so it only took a few minutes. I loaded the dishwasher, turned it on, and the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I was greeted by the stunning Laura. "Laura, please come in," I said. She hugged and kissed me. We shared some wine and chatted like old friends. I was extremely curious about her sudden visit, why now, and what her intentions were. Laura was always forward-thinking, constantly planning her next steps with a plan B and plan C ready. I wondered which one I was and if I was merely an option for her to escape a persistent boyfriend who couldn't take the hint that their relationship was over. As expected, after some small talk, Laura subtly conveyed the purpose of her visit. She wanted to start dating again, specifically with me. I had to consider what had changed for her to decide that I was someone she wanted to date. If I wasn't the one before, what made me the top choice on her list now? I realized I hadn't significantly changed in the past 2 years, so it must have been something on her end, perhaps an awakening or a realization. I had no idea what that was, but I thought, wine is cheap, and she's welcome to enjoy my apartment while she decides to share what's truly on her mind. Eventually, she did. A year later. Laura and I are now engaged. I can already hear your thoughts. How did this happen? A year ago, she had rejected me. I had proposed, and she said no. That moment made it clear I wasn't the right person for her, and I decided to move on with my life. Part of the reason I moved to Canada to continue my education was to focus on personal growth. I immersed myself in work and study, using those 2 years to master my field and take full advantage of the opportunities offered by my university. This past year has been transformative, not just for me, but for my understanding of relationships. I never intended to propose to Laura again, especially after her initial rejection. Yet, unexpectedly, she approached me. This time, she was the one to ask, and her proposal carried a unique perspective on what our future could look like. Laura expressed her love for me and her desire to build a life together, but she also emphasized that our relationship would require an open-minded approach to make it work. This led to many heartfelt conversations about boundaries, expectations, and how we could ensure a strong partnership while respecting each other's individuality. We eventually decided on an open marriage. While unconventional, it was something we both believed could work with mutual respect and clearly defined guidelines. Here are the principles we established. 1. Establishing boundaries. We discussed what was acceptable and what wasn't. Trust and communication were key. We agreed that no outside relationships would interfere with our time together or take place in our shared spaces. 2. Prioritizing each other. We planned activities and committed to a schedule that kept our relationship at the forefront. This ensured that any external interactions wouldn't overshadow our connection. 3. Emotional honesty. We promised to be transparent about any feelings that might arise from outside interactions. If anything compromised our relationship, we committed to discussing it openly. 4. Regular check-ins. Every 2 weeks, we revisited our arrangement to ensure it was working for both of us. This included addressing any challenges or emotions like jealousy, which could arise over time. 5. Respect and discretion. We agreed to approach this arrangement with maturity and sensitivity, ensuring that it strengthened rather than weakened our bond. Initially, these guidelines seemed to work. For 2 years, our arrangement allowed us to explore individuality while maintaining a committed partnership. However, as time went on, cracks began to appear. We realized that even with the best intentions and clear rules, the complexity of human emotions could make such an arrangement challenging. Ultimately, our journey taught us valuable lessons about love, compromise, and the importance of prioritizing a healthy relationship. While unconventional paths may seem appealing, they require careful navigation and an unwavering commitment to mutual respect. Lara was content, and so was I. Our lives were hectic, and we acknowledged that our demanding careers required our attention. Quietly, very quietly, we continued our journey both as a couple and individually. Lara dated several partners over time, while I was involved with 2 different women. Eventually, both of our circles narrowed down to 1 person each. We engaged in many activities together as a couple, such as taking vacations, enjoying weekend outings, and pursuing hobbies. I'm passionate about cycling and participate in local competitions in Washington and Oregon. I'm not particularly skilled, and victories are rare for me. Achieving a top 10 position feels like a successful day. I own 2 bikes, a Trek road racer and my primary bike, a Rocky Mountain Growler, which I purchased for under $1,000. It's durable and meets my needs perfectly. I don't expect to become a professional cyclist or compete in the Tour de France, but cycling is something I truly love and provides an excellent workout. On days when cycling isn't possible, I either go for a run or hit the gym. Perhaps you're interested in learning more about Lara and me. I'll begin with myself. My name is Daniel Lewis Stewart. My father has traced our ancestry back to Scotland, prior to the Battle of Culloden. Our ancestors played significant roles in that battle. I visited the battlefield and walked the grounds where the Jacobites and the English forces stood in 1746. Although the Jacobites were defeated that day, the struggle for Scottish independence has persisted. Even today, many Scots continue to strive for self-governance. The Battle of Culloden marked the final clash of the Jacobite uprising. On April 16, 1746, Charles Edward Stuart's Jacobite forces were outnumbered and decisively beaten by the British government troops, led by the Duke of Cumberland near Inverness in the Scottish Highlands. In modern times, the tools for such struggles are words, media, public opinion, and voting. Scotland is destined to govern itself someday. I'm not sure when that will happen, but it will be a cause for celebration among both Scots and Scottish expatriates worldwide. The people there are wonderful, living in a land that is both rugged and stunning, reminiscent of the landscapes in Montana, Wyoming, and yes, Washington State. I cherish this region and take pride in my heritage. But let's return to the main story. My parents have recently retired and still reside nearby. My father, who was an engineer, achieved significant success in his career. Additionally, he made early investments in the technology sector, which are now paying off. Together, my parents purchased a large RV and are currently traveling across North America. I have an older brother who is training to become a doctor, a process that takes a long time, and a younger sister who aspires to be a lawyer, often joking about working alongside doctors in the future. He never finds it funny. Neither of my siblings are married, and as far as I know, they aren't involved in any serious relationships. I pursued my undergraduate studies in mechanical engineering at Washington State University, also known as UW. I'm passionate about figuring out how things work, designing innovative solutions to complex problems, and doing so responsibly. Recognizing the importance of reducing pollution to preserve our planet, I decided to further my education by earning a master's degree in mechanical engineering. I attended a top-tier university in Eastern Canada, renowned for training professional engineers, where I dedicated 2 years to learning from the best. My wife, Laura Marie Donaldson, is originally from Seattle. We met at the University of Washington, where she studied business. She initially secured a position with a prominent local company specializing in computers and software. Currently, Laura works in the commercial lending division of a large national bank. She earns a good salary and receives annual bonuses amounting to about 20% of her yearly income. Her family also lives in the area. Her parents are both healthy, and her father has recently retired after a career as an army officer. He's a very disciplined and no-nonsense individual. Her mother is an elementary school teacher and is planning to retire around the same time as Laura's father, with plans to travel extensively. Laura has an older sister who resides in California. Laura is a wonderful person, intelligent, kind, and talented. Her confident and positive demeanor often draws admiration from others. I feel incredibly lucky to share my life with her, and our journey together is something I cherish deeply. 2 years later. Dan. My cell phone was chirping, jolting me awake. I knew I had to check it. It was probably Laura. She was spending the night with a friend. It was just past 6 a.m. We weren't supposed to do that. Staying up all night violated our rules. I'm not sure how we drifted away from the agreement we made. It seems like the agreement has been abandoned, and I'm frustrated about it. I keep trying to bring it up, but it keeps getting postponed. I glanced at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize. I considered not answering, thinking it might be a spam call from Mumbai about my computer having errors. But since Lara wasn't home, I knew I had to answer to make sure she was okay. Groggily, I picked up. Hello. There was crying on the other end, instantly putting me on high alert as I sat up in bed. Lara, is that you? Her voice was shaky, and I could immediately sense something was seriously wrong. She was crying and sniffling, struggling to speak. Dan? Lara, I'm here. What's wrong? I need you to come get me right away. Where are you? I'm at the Warfield, downtown. I know where that is. What happened? What's going on? I need you to come and get me. Please bring me a change of clothes. Hurry. I tried to get more details, but she hung up after giving me her room number and repeating that she needed something to wear. I quickly packed her sweatpants, shirt, a bra, some underwear, socks, and her running shoes into a sports bag and dashed to my car. We lived in a 2-bedroom rental in Kirkland. It wasn't far from downtown, but in an emergency, it felt like it took forever to get there. Thankfully, it was early and there was no traffic. I arrived at the hotel, grabbed the bag, and rushed inside to the elevator. When I reached her floor, I took the wrong direction to her room and had to turn back. The few seconds it took felt like an hour. I knocked loudly and called out her name. I heard movement inside, and slowly the door opened. Stepping into the room, I was stunned by what I saw. Lara jumped at me and I hugged her tightly. She was crying and sobbing, struggling to breathe. Snot dripped from her nose, and her eyes were red and watery. It was obvious Lara had been beaten. She had a black eye, a split lip, and bruises on her face. She was NACD, with bruises on her arms and legs, and when she turned around, I saw welts on her backside and thighs. Oh my God, my wife was devastated. I was nearly speechless. I lifted her and carried her to the bed. The sheets and pillows were scattered on the floor. As I placed her on the bare mattress, she winced and shook in obvious pain. Laura clung to my neck, not wanting to let go. "I'm here, baby. You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you anymore." My heart was racing, and I felt my blood pressure soaring. I was furious, but at that moment, other priorities took over. I needed to get Laura out of there and to a hospital as quickly as possible. "Sweetie, I need you to put this on." I pulled out the clothes I had brought and helped her get dressed. I searched for her other clothes but couldn't find any. I did locate her leather purse, with her wallet and other items inside. I called her cell phone and heard it ringing under the bed. I retrieved it and tossed it and her purse into the bag with her workout clothes. "Where are your clothes, Lara?" "I think he took them with him. I'm not sure." Lara was still in pain, and I carefully helped her stand. We quickly left and got into my car, heading to the nearest emergency room, but she placed her hand on my arm, asking me to take her home instead. "Jesus Christ, you need to see a doctor." "I will, but right now, please just take me home." Reluctantly, I agreed. Once inside our apartment, she went straight to the bedroom and then the shower. She spent almost an hour there, letting the hot water soothe her sore muscles and bruises. I handed her 3 extra-strength Tylenol tablets along with a glass of orange juice to help her take them. She accepted both, placed the pills in her mouth, drank the juice, returned the glass to me, and went back under the hot water. After her shower, Lara changed into flannel pajamas and crawled into bed. I knew we had some serious conversations ahead, but for now, she needed rest and recovery. Lara slept for nearly 12 hours before coming into the kitchen. I was sitting at the counter when I heard her bare feet approaching down the hallway. She gave me a hesitant look as I motioned for her to take a seat. Her back was still sore, so I placed a cushion on her stool. I prepared some vegetable soup and a chicken sandwich for her, knowing she needed nourishment. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "A bit better. The shower and the sleep really helped." The concern on my face must have been obvious. "You're going to see a doctor. There's no debating this. I've already called and scheduled an appointment. After you eat, get dressed and I'll drive you." Lara frowned slightly, clearly reluctant, but didn't argue. Half an hour later, we were in the car heading to the doctor's office. When I called earlier, I had explained Lara's injuries and the urgent need for medical attention. My priority was to ensure she received proper care. After the examination, the doctor approached me with a concerned expression. "What happened to your wife?" she asked. Her tone was serious. "I'm advising a follow-up with specialists and would recommend filing a formal report." I nodded. "I'll do whatever she needs." Later that day, we went home. The events were heavy on both of us, but I focused on helping Lara recover. Over the following days, we spoke very little. I could sense Lara was trying to push the ordeal out of her mind, hoping time would erase the scars. But healing, both physically and emotionally, wasn't that simple. 3 weeks later, Lara was back at work and had resumed her daily routine. I had returned to work as well, but the atmosphere at home was distant. It was clear we were both avoiding a deeper conversation about what had happened. After dinner one Friday evening, I poured Lara a glass of wine and said, "Lara, we need to talk." Her face showed sheer panic. I took a seat at the dining table and gestured for her to join me. It might seem a bit formal, but I intended it that way. This wasn't going to be a light conversation. It was destined to be one of those talks that define a relationship. "Lara, I'm genuinely worried about you. I don't want to see you get physically hurt, but I'm uncertain if you're following through with the commitments you made to stay safe when we agreed to an open marriage. I'm scared you might end up seriously injured or even dead. I want you to stop seeing other men." In my mind, there was an unspoken "or else," but I kept it to myself. Essentially, it meant I couldn't remain married to her while watching her self-destructive behavior. My anger was so intense that I was shaking. I stood up and began pacing the room, struggling to stay calm before finally sitting back down. I'm really concerned about you. What you did was reckless and foolish. What were you thinking? Lara glanced at the table, clearly uncomfortable. Dan, I thought he was all right. I'd met him before, and this was the second time we hooked up at the hotel. He seemed nice before. My frustration was mounting. Well, damn. You broke several of the agreements we made when we got married. Or have you forgotten them? It certainly looks like you have. You didn't share all the usual things you're supposed to communicate. I can't trust you anymore. What am I supposed to think? What am I supposed to do? Lara stayed silent, staring into her wine glass. She took a big sip and sighed as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. I took a small drink and continued with what I believed was necessary. Lara, I'm leaving for a while. I can't handle this anymore. I'm constantly worried about you, and I know this situation is causing me a lot of stress. She suddenly looked up, her expression lost and confused. My words had taken her by surprise. She remained silent. Lara was aware that my deep love for her meant I was willing to tolerate a lot. For instance, I had agreed to her maintaining close connections with others, just so I could remain close to her. I also occasionally spent time with another friend, so, in truth, we both shared equal responsibility for the complexity of our relationship. When we married, I believed these issues would eventually resolve, especially once we started a family. I thought the responsibilities of family life would bring us closer, helping us stabilize and grow as a couple. We had agreed to focus on building a traditional monogamous life together, leaving behind past behaviors. However, things didn't go as planned. Lara valued the security our marriage provided and the appearance of a normal life. To the outside world, we seemed like an ordinary married couple with careers and future plans, but internally, we struggled with aligning our priorities. Over the past year, Lara increasingly prioritized her social life, leaving less time for us. Our connection waned, and I found myself focusing more on my work and a new friendship I had developed. I met a woman named Sarah Ann Walker through a project at work. Sarah is an architect and has worked on several projects with me since I completed my master's degree. She's intelligent, poised, and highly skilled in her field, and we quickly built a strong professional rapport. Shortly after we met, we spent a month collaborating on a building design for a tech company aiming to minimize its environmental impact. Our long hours working together led to a meaningful friendship. Sarah's intellect and perspective helped me navigate not just our project, but also personal challenges I was facing at home. Sarah and I often discussed our lives openly, offering each other advice and support. It was refreshing to have someone to talk to about the difficulties I was experiencing in my marriage. Though my feelings for Sarah deepened, I remained focused on trying to make things work with Lara. The dynamics of relationships aren't always straightforward. People have different needs and desires, and those can change over time. This variability is one reason relationships require constant effort and understanding. A close friend of mine once shared his advice about relationships, emphasizing the importance of finding happiness in the little things and focusing on what makes your partner unique. His stories about his family often made me reflect on my own relationship and the changes I needed to make. My connection with Sarah provided a sense of emotional stability I was missing. Meanwhile, Lara's need for independence and exploration made me question what we wanted from each other. Despite these challenges, I couldn't bring myself to leave her. I've often wondered why I stayed, and each time the answer boiled down to love and the hope that things might change. The recent incident during a trip to Seattle became a turning point for me. It was clear that our relationship needed to evolve. It was no longer about compromise, but about deciding if we were truly aligned in our goals. I knew that for us to start a family and build a stable future, we couldn't continue as we were. I realized that change was inevitable, for both of us, and to move forward, I needed to take the first steps toward adapting and growing. That Friday night, we gathered around the dining room table and had a very honest conversation. I informed Laura that I was going to leave her for a few weeks. There was no room for negotiation. We both needed time apart to determine what mattered most to us and to envision our future, whether it would be together or separately. Laura looked at me with a deeply hurt expression. "Please, Dan, don't leave me. I promise I'll do a better job of sticking to our agreement." "Laura, I'm starting to doubt if you even remember what our agreement was. You've consistently ignored everything we both agreed was necessary for our marriage while still allowing us to see other people occasionally, but it's all gotten way out of control." I took a small sip of my beer. "Please don't try to deny it. I'm not that naive or easily fooled. Jesus, you still have the leftover bruises on your body, and the marks on your back haven't fully healed yet." Laura took a large gulp of her wine and stared at the table. Her silence indicated that she either agreed or at least recognized that I was right, even if she didn't agree. I continued, "I'm going to leave for a while. I can't stay here and watch you destroy yourself. I won't do that. You need to figure out what you really want. If you want to stay married to me, we have to make some changes, and we have to do it now. Otherwise, I think we're finished." There it stood, the critical point. I glanced at Laura, who kept staring at the table in silence. Her lack of response said everything. Deep down, I knew she wasn't going to change. She wouldn't become the wife I truly wanted. The room was filled with an overwhelming silence. In that moment, as I looked at her and she avoided my gaze, I realized exactly what she desired. It wasn't me. I rose from the table, went to the bedroom, and began packing. I decided to take about a week's worth of belongings. By the end of the week, I would know whether to leave for good or if there was even a slight chance for our marriage. Laura remained silent as I gathered my things. I came out with a suitcase, a sports bag, and my laptop bag. I grabbed a few more items from the closet near the front door. My bikes and helmets were in the storage room of the underground garage. It wouldn't take long to load them onto the bike rack on my car. My vehicle was a small SUV, a Subaru Crosstrek. The bike rack attached easily to the trailer hitch, making it simple to install or remove. The Crosstrek was perfect for me. It had excellent four-wheel drive, just enough space for all my sports gear, was relatively economical to run, and easy to park. It was the best of all worlds and never broke down. It didn't take long to load everything into and onto the car, and I slowly drove away. Laura stayed in the apartment. Deep down, I knew I was leaving behind my marriage and my old life.
Lara. I've really messed things up this time. I was in a good place, but now I've upset the only person who truly cared about me and stood by my side. Dan is a good husband, maybe even too good for someone like me. I was the one who set the conditions for our marriage, and now I feel like I've shattered everything. Why can't I be content with one person who loves me? Why do I always seem to crave excitement and push boundaries that I shouldn't? Dan thinks I need professional help, and maybe he's right. A few weeks ago, I got myself into a situation that went way too far. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, and things quickly spiraled out of control. I ignored my better judgment and let impulsive decisions take over. In the end, it left me feeling broken and ashamed. Dan was the one who came to my rescue. He picked me up, brought me home, and took care of me when I couldn't even face myself in the mirror. He was angry, of course, and I can't blame him. But he also reminded me of what it means to care for someone, even when they've hurt you deeply. I know I've caused so much damage, and it might be too late to fix things. Too late to save my marriage. Too late to make things right with Dan. But maybe it's not too late to change, for myself, if nothing else.
Dan, I stayed at a friend's house for the initial few days. However, living in his spare room quickly became monotonous, prompting me to take a step back from everything. I decided to call in sick to work, secured a few weeks of vacation, and then grabbed my bikes to explore the trails in the hills east of the city. I needed to be outside, exert myself, clear my mind, and determine what truly mattered to me. After several days of complete mental rest, I was finally able to address the issue with Lara. On the fourth night, I took out a notepad and jotted down some of my thoughts. You might assume I'd use my phone's note feature since I'm immersed in high-tech daily, but this time I chose the traditional pen and paper method. The recurring central issue was the concept of sharing my wife. When I decided to marry Lara, I believed that enduring the discomfort of sharing her was worth having her as my wife 90% of the time. I thought having 90% of her was better than none. However, I'm now uncertain. The 10% I lack seems to negate the 90% I possess. Does that even make sense? Lately, it felt like I only had her about 20% of the time. It seemed I was merely an inconvenience in her life. She often forgot our plans and would inform me at the last minute that she had other things to do. I was acutely aware of what those other things were. She was my wife in name only, a piece of paper that bound us together. I felt like an afterthought, someone she had to see occasionally. Spending 80 miles on mountain bike trails provided me with a fresh perspective on life. Doing it 5 consecutive days challenged even my most deeply held beliefs. During that week, I made some decisions I knew I needed to make. I had isolated myself from everyone during that period. My phone was turned off, and I stayed at a small motel in the hills with barely any TV cable, let alone internet access. I cleared both my mind and body, and at the end of the week, I returned to the city and rented a modest Airbnb. I brought back the notepad containing my most personal thoughts. It was also where I drew conclusions about my survival and future. Upon returning to civilization, I dedicated time to maintenance and cleaning tasks. First, I cleaned my equipment, then I cleaned myself. I enjoyed nearly 30 minutes standing in a hot shower with a cold beer in hand. It was a moment to calm my mind and finalize my plan for the next steps.
Sarah. Over the past week, I attempted to reach Dan. I called his office, but they informed me he was on leave and weren't aware of his activities. I also tried his mobile and left a voicemail. I was aware that he and his wife had an open marriage, with her enjoying meeting other men for casual encounters. I knew Dan wasn't entirely comfortable with this arrangement. Additionally, I remembered that our relationship was very informal. We hadn't made any commitments, and I didn't anticipate any. Typically, Dan and I would meet once a week for casual intimacy. It was purely for enjoyment, a way to unwind and satisfy my needs. I assumed that eventually he and his wife would move past the open marriage. If they chose to have children, that would likely prompt them to prioritize monogamy, recognizing its importance for a successful family. My own husband realized early in our marriage that monogamy wasn't crucial for him. He also found that fatherhood wasn't his passion, leading him to conclude that remaining married wasn't in his best interest. We divorced, which turned out to be the best decision for everyone. He relocated to Connecticut, possibly Hartford, where he works for an insurance company in some capacity. I receive a small monthly check for his portion of child support, which I deposit into my 2-year-old daughter's education fund. She doesn't remember her father, and thankfully my memories of him are faint. Dan is inherently a good person with a strong moral compass. That's why I was surprised when he revealed that he and his wife had an open marriage. As I got to know him better, I understood the reasoning behind it. The reason was straightforward. Deep down, he loved his wife but knew she would never be entirely his or fully committed to him. To honor their open marriage, he connected with me, and we became friends with benefits. We've maintained this arrangement for several months, and it's been beneficial. For me, it allows me to satisfy my needs regularly without entering a romantic relationship. I wasn't seeking commitment from the start. I had been hurt by my ex-husband and wasn't willing to risk that again. This friends with benefits setup has also been positive for Dan. It offers him a different perspective on an intimacy relationship with a woman. I've been clear with him from the beginning that our interaction is purely recreational, and that I'm not seeking commitment from him or anyone else. It also saves me from the complexities of the dating scene, which I simply don't have time for. In summary, Dan has been good for me, and I've been good for him. However, I'm uncertain how much longer we can continue this way. He's a wonderful person.
Lara, Dan has left me. He packed some of his belongings, took his mountain bike, and walked out. I have no idea where he went. I've reached out to his friends and his workplace, but they either don't know where he is or aren't willing to share that information. I'm not quite sure what his issue is. Before we got married, we agreed that we could see other people. He understands my needs and agreed that I could be intimate with other men. He accepted that I could fulfill my desires independently. I know he's a wonderful person and a great husband. He always does whatever I ask. So why is he struggling with this now? Yes, things went too far with that guy at the hotel. I admit that maybe I should have left before he tied me to the bed, but that was just a one-time thing. Additionally, Dan has a girlfriend. He's seeing another woman. I think her name is Susan, but I'm not entirely sure. I believe they met through work or something similar. He told me a little about her, but I've forgotten most of the details. So what's his problem? Dan will come back. He'll get over his hurt and return. He can't stay away from me for too long. After all, I turned him down when he first asked me to marry him, and he came back. He's been gone for a while now and hasn't reached out. Maybe once he realizes what he's missing, he'll come to his senses. Perhaps I'll call him in a few days.
Dan. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been reflecting deeply on my life, the decisions I've made, what truly matters to me, and the changes I need to make to create the future I want. Looking back on the last few years, I've started to question whether marrying Lara was the best choice. While she is captivating and confident, I feel that our connection lacks the depth I need in a partnership. Perhaps I rushed into the relationship, or maybe she saw me as a stabilizing presence during a turbulent time in her life. I've come to realize that I can't continue being the foundation for her while neglecting my own needs and growth. I need a few more days to organize my thoughts before taking the steps to realign my life. Yesterday, Sarah texted me to check in and see how I was doing. I replied simply, "I will be." Her response was, "Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." Her message gave me a sense of reassurance. Sarah has a genuine and caring nature. Even though we've maintained a close friendship, she consistently shows concern for those around her. Her kindness and thoughtfulness have made me reflect on what I truly value in relationships. I've also realized how important it is for me to build a family, and I now know that Lara and I aren't aligned in that vision. This situation is complicated, but for the first time in a while, I feel clarity about the path I need to take to move forward.
Pauset. Sarah. After not hearing from Dan for 2 weeks, I decided to reach out. While his silence wasn't entirely unusual, I was concerned and wanted to make sure he was okay. I also wanted to share my honest perspective about his current situation. From what I've seen, Lara doesn't seem to appreciate Dan for who he truly is. She appears to rely on him to create the illusion of stability while not fully committing to the relationship. While I don't want to sound overly critical, her actions suggest that she may not have Dan's best interests at heart. Dan is a kind and caring person who deserves to be in a partnership where he is valued and supported. It's hard to see someone like him being taken for granted. Having gone through my own challenges, I understand how difficult it can be to navigate relationships. After the birth of my daughter Matilda, my marriage fell apart. My husband chose to prioritize his personal freedom over his responsibilities to our family, which led to our separation. While it was a painful experience, it taught me to value integrity and commitment above all else. I don't want to see Dan go through a similar situation. He has so much to offer, and he deserves to be with someone who sees and appreciates his worth. While I don't know what the future holds, I'm committed to being there for him in whatever way I can. Sometimes, life's most challenging moments lead us to the clarity we need to grow and move forward.
Dan, fuck, I'm completely drained. It's more of a mental challenge than a physical one. I went for an extended run this morning, and it felt great to push myself and sweat. When I headed out at 5 a.m., there were only a few other runners out. By the time I finished at 8, the day was already in full swing with people and traffic. I have a meeting today with a divorce lawyer. I need to initiate the process and I need support. Laura and I don't have many physical assets. We rent an apartment, but we both own cars and some other stuff. I'm still paying off student loans, but I've been trying to save some money. I thought it would be a good idea if we decided to have children. What a joke that seems now. Dan, later that day. The meeting with the lawyer went largely as I had expected. I'm pursuing what's known in this state as a dissolution of marriage, which states that the marriage is irretrievably broken, with no chance of reconciliation. The straightforward part is that, since we don't have children or substantial property involved, the process is quite simple. We file an application with the court, and if both of us agree and settle the terms of the dissolution, the court just approves it, and we're officially separated. The entire procedure takes about 90 days. I provided the lawyer with a detailed inventory of our assets and debts and instructed her to proceed with the paperwork. I'll bring the dissolution application when I visit Laura. I need to call her later this week after I receive the documents back to arrange a time to talk. It's been over 2 weeks since I last heard from her. She hasn't been actively calling or texting, so I assume she's been busy with one or more of her boyfriends. My interactions with Sarah have been minimal, so I'm uncertain about her situation. She's probably keeping her distance, recognizing the chaos my life has become, and doesn't want that added complication. I need to move on from Laura and focus on my work. Yesterday, I received a call from Laura's mother. She had tried reaching her daughter and hadn't heard from her in a few weeks. When I told her that I'd moved out, she was left speechless. There was a moment of silence on the phone before she finally asked, "What's going on, Dan?" I chose to keep it vague, saying we had some disagreements and it was best to take some time apart. However, Laura's mother isn't naive and knew a lot about her daughter's behavior. She was aware that Laura enjoyed relationships with multiple men, but had hoped that marriage had changed that. "Oh my God, Dan, is she still seeing other men?" She got straight to the point. I hesitated before responding. "I'm afraid that's the case. It's gotten worse, and I can't continue living like this. She doesn't have the desire or ability to change, and I can't reach her. I have to leave for my own sanity. I'm sorry." She remained silent for a moment. "I understand, Dan. You have to do what you need to do. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help either of you." With that, she ended the call.
Lara, I need to talk to Dan, but I'm scared to call him. I know he's hurt, and maybe it's best if I just leave him alone. I need to get out of here. I'm losing my mind waiting in the apartment for him to call or come home. I'm unsure what to do. My mother called and tore me apart, calling me several names I hadn't heard before. "Stupid a girl of easy virtue" was one of the less harsh insults she used. She demanded to know why on earth I had been messing around with Dan. I couldn't really be honest with her, could I? That's not something you share with your mother. So, I admitted some of my foolishness and left it at that. Damn, my phone is ringing, and Dan's picture just appeared on the screen. Maybe he's on his way home. "Hello, Dan?" There was a brief pause. "Lara, it's me. I need to talk to you. When is a good time?" "Whenever you want, Dan. Tonight would be perfect. I'll cancel my plans." Damn, I shouldn't have said that. He might think I was going out to see someone else. "What time works for you?" "I'll be home by 6, so any time after that?" "All right." He hung up without any "love you" or "goodbye." His voice sounded very cold and unhappy. I arrived home just before Dan did. He buzzed the lobby for me to let him in. "Don't you still have your key?" I asked when he buzzed. "I wanted to make sure you were alone." "Oh no. He probably thinks I had someone else over as soon as he left." "Please come in, Dan." A few minutes later, he knocked on the door. I opened it and saw my husband for the first time in over 3 weeks. "Come in." I went to the kitchen. Would you like something to eat? When did you learn to cook? Sorry, that was a low blow. You don't deserve that. He had always been the epitome of a gentleman, consistently the nice guy. What's the word? Chivalrous. Exactly. Do you have a beer or maybe a Coke in your fridge? Why was he requesting something from his own refrigerator? Oh, damn it. I finally understand. He doesn't feel like he belongs here anymore. This isn't his apartment anymore. He's merely a guest. I can sense his pain deep in my gut. This conversation isn't going to end well. I stood up and walked over to the fridge. There wasn't much inside. I hadn't eaten at home much since Dan left. A single beer was hidden in the back corner of one shelf, so I rearranged some items to retrieve it. I then went to the cabinet where we kept the glasses and grabbed one for him. Thanks, he said as he took the bottle. He sat down at the table, placing the large envelope he was holding next to him. He opened the beer and took a small sip without using a glass. I held my breath, waiting for him to speak. I sat across from him, anticipating the blow. How have you been, Dan? Thanks for meeting with me. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Lara. Reflecting on you, me, and our marriage. Why we got married, what I wanted, what you wanted. I've figured out some things and now have a clearer vision for my future. Here it comes. I guess I deserve whatever he's about to say. Dan met my gaze and continued. I'm not sure that what you seek from marriage aligns with what I want from it. I don't think our marriage was a good idea. I love you deeply, but you desire things and a lifestyle that I can't provide anymore. I can't be the faithful husband waiting for you to return from nights and weekends with other men. That's not what I want. I was looking at the man who had told me he loved me, now telling me our marriage was ending. I thought I loved you enough to do that, but I've realized I can't anymore. I can't be the other man in your life. I even found another woman to fill the void when you didn't want to be my full-time wife. There was a pause as Dan looked at me. I stared at the table and my hands. He continued, his voice very quiet. What kind of life is that for either of us? We can't be married part-time to each other. Maybe you're okay with it, but I'm not anymore. Another pause. Lara, I need a wife, a full-time wife. Another pause. You don't want what I want. You don't want just me. Just me isn't enough for you. Another pause. This time, Dan slowly slid the large envelope across the table to me. As I looked at it, I realized our life together was over. I understood then that I had been wrong. I had used Dan for my own enjoyment. I used him to give those around me the impression that I was a responsible adult with a normal family. It was all just an act. What's in the envelope, Dan? He looked at me, took a small sip of his beer, and replied, I had a lawyer prepare a petition for dissolution of our marriage. It's a divorce request. It splits everything we have equally. I know we don't have much. Another pause. Lara, we're young. We can move on and decide what we both want. We can both start fresh. You can do what you want, with whoever you want. He took another small sip of his beer. You need to take this to a lawyer and have them review it. My lawyer says that since we don't own much, this is fair for both of us. My lawyer's business card is in the envelope. Have your lawyer contact mine. I understand that once we both agree, they'll file the papers with the court, and 90 days later, it will be official. We'll be unmarried. I nodded, still staring at the envelope as if something would jump out at me. Is this really what you want, Dan? Lara, I can't keep living like this. I can't share you with anyone else. I can't keep seeing you go out knowing you intend to be with other men. This isn't a marriage. It's an arrangement. One I can't live with anymore. We both deserve more. This allows you to do whatever you want without worrying about me, and it allows me to find what I want. Dan took another small sip, set the bottle down, and stood up. He walked to the door. I'm sorry, Lara, but I can't stay with you like this. He quietly closed the door behind him. I noticed he barely drank from the beer bottle. I remained at the table for over an hour before finally getting up and finishing the remaining beer. I picked up my cell phone, scrolled through my contacts, and selected a specific one. It rang. I heard, "Hello? Robbie, what are you doing? Want to hang out later?"
Dan. Talking to Laura was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I spent nearly 2 weeks sorting through my thoughts, trying to figure out what I truly wanted, and in the process, I learned a lot about myself. Yes, I loved Laura, but I've realized there are limits to what I'm willing to tolerate, especially since it's clear she doesn't love me in the same way. Her love comes with conditions. It's divided. She prioritizes her own needs above everything else, and those needs are driven by physical desires. She craves attention from multiple men, which means my role as her husband always comes second. Oh, I know, she says she loves me, but actions speak louder than words, as my father always says. Even as she tells me she loves me, her mind is elsewhere, on other men. I refuse to be anyone's second choice, not anymore. The lack of children makes the divorce process much simpler. I didn't feel angry or vengeful about it. Instead, I chalked up our marriage to me being lonely and Laura giving me what I thought I'd never have. Don't get me wrong, when we were intimate, it was amazing. When we spent time together, it was fun. But I've come to realize that many of the things Laura did with me were only to keep me content so she could maintain her other life. She didn't really enjoy biking but joined me occasionally. She'd go hiking with me, but I knew that dirt and bugs didn't appeal to her at all. I haven't seen or spoken to Sarah in weeks. I figured she would have moved on by now, probably finding someone else who meets her needs. I wasn't sure if I should reach out, so I didn't.
3 months later. Lara. I'm looking for a new apartment. Something smaller than this one. This place is more space than I need, and I'd prefer to live downtown, closer to work and the social scene I enjoy. Dan came by to take a few more of his things, but he left the majority of our shared belongings to me. I've heard that he's moved into a new place, but I don't know exactly where. His friends are pretty protective of him and won't tell me anything. I haven't reached out to his family either. The bank where I work is undergoing a restructure, and they've informed me that I'll be moving to a new department within the same building. Maybe this is the change I need. I've cut back on dating and am currently seeing just one guy. He's nice and safe. He knows about my reputation and made it clear from the start that he's not interested in sharing or anything like that. He told me he'd leave if I couldn't commit to being exclusive. I promised him I'd reformed, but deep down, I know I'll eventually fail and let my impulses take over. A girl's gotta do what a girl's gotta do.
Sarah. It's been a few months since I last saw Dan. Work and taking care of Matilda have kept me busy, so the time has flown by. I'm a little hesitant to reach out to him. I'm not sure what kind of headspace he's in. Does he want to see me? Is he in a new relationship? Or maybe he's just taking a break from dating? I don't know. Maybe I should discreetly ask around before I decide.
Dan. I've been keeping myself busy with work, biking, and running. It's a repetitive routine, but I've gotten into the best shape of my life. I've been putting in long hours at work, doing my best, but despite all of this, I feel so lonely. Lara hasn't called or shown any indication that she's willing to change to try to save our marriage. That just confirms what I already knew. I'm hesitant to get back out there and try to meet someone new. I'm scared of putting myself in a vulnerable position again. But I know I can't let Lara's behavior shape how I see other women. Sarah, for example, is completely different from Lara. Her outlook on life is so much more grounded. She values family, home, her career, and doing the right thing. She's the kind of person who tries to make the world a little better. Maybe I should call her, see if she'd like to meet up this weekend. Perhaps I could take her and Matilda on a hike. I'll pack a lunch. That could be nice. The weather's supposed to be perfect for it.
Sarah. Dan called me this morning, which was a bit of a surprise. The conversation started off a little awkward, considering I hadn't heard from him in over 4 months. We ended up talking for about half an hour. He said he was calling to ask if Matilda and I had plans for the weekend, and if not, whether we'd like to go on a hike and have a picnic lunch with him. I was surprised. Not by the hike, but by the fact that he specifically invited Matilda too. She's 3 years old now, and while she's full of energy, she tires out quickly. Still, I accepted the invitation. Now, I just need to find my hiking boots, wherever they are.
Dan. I'm a nervous wreck. I planned an easy hike for us and packed plenty of food and water. I even brought along 2 hiking poles, though I'm not sure we'll need them. I packed a lightweight thermal blanket so we could sit on it during lunch. Oh, and I cleaned my car. Kids need car seats, right? I'm sure Sarah has one covered. When I arrived at Sarah's house around 10 a.m. on Saturday, she was already prepared. There was a car seat sitting in the driveway, and I could see she had a backpack packed and ready to go. I got out of the car, and Sarah greeted me warmly. She looked amazing. Her hair was a bit shorter, and she was dressed like she just stepped out of an LL Bean catalog: plaid shirt, shorts, and hiking boots. I couldn't help but smile. It was clear she was excited about the day. Even though I'd met Matilda once before, I introduced myself again. She was spinning in circles, and it was obvious she was thrilled about the day ahead. I secured the car seat in the back and loaded the gear into the trunk. Then we set off. Driving with a child in the car was a first for me, and I found myself more cautious than usual. For the first time, I felt truly responsible for someone else's safety. I actually stuck to the speed limit. The hike started off well, but I quickly discovered that little girls need frequent bathroom breaks, especially after drinking a bottle of Gatorade on the way. Sarah kept apologizing, but I waved it off. Hey, kids gotta do what they gotta do. I also had to adjust my expectations for how far we'd hike. I had planned to reach a lookout point for lunch, but our smallest hiker ran out of steam before we got there. No problem. We spread out the blanket where we stopped, had lunch, and I took some pictures. I even helped Matilda take a few of her own. What I didn't realize at the time was that this wasn't just a hike. It was an interview, a very important one. It was the kind of interview that lasts months, with challenges and tests along the way. And the results? Well, both interviewers would have to agree before I'd learn how I did. When we got back to Sarah's house, she invited me to stay for dinner. I hesitated for a moment, and she quickly added, "If you have other plans, no worries. It's not going to be 5-star cuisine." I stumbled over my words, but managed to say, "No, I don't have anything else to do. I'd love to stay, thank you." Inside, I took off my hiking boots, and Matilda grabbed my hand, pulling me down the hall to her room to show me her toy collection. It was adorable. She carefully demonstrated every toy she had, including all the poses her Toy Story dolls could do. She even pulled the string on Woody's back to hear him say, "Somebody's poisoned the water hole." Priceless. Dinner was lively. Eating with a 3-year-old staring at you can feel like an interrogation, silent but intense. I swear the unblinking gaze of a small child could break the toughest suspect. The police should try it. I helped Sarah prepare dinner while Matilda colored at the counter. She'd occasionally ask my opinion. Should the balloons be red, yellow, or both? I suggested mixing colors, which she acknowledged with a thoughtful, In the end, she used both. After dinner, I helped clean up and then joined Matilda on the couch to read a story. Every time I missed a word, she'd catch me and make me reread it. She called me silly more times than I could count. Later, when Matilda was tucked into bed, Sarah and I sat in the living room sharing a quiet moment together. "I don't know how you do it," I said. "Being a mom and a busy architect, how do you manage everything?" Sarah laughed. "Sometimes I bring work home, and I'm used to surviving on very little sleep. Some days are harder than others." I nodded. When we first started seeing each other last year, we didn't talk about Matilda. Why was that? I wanted to keep those parts of my life separate. My needs are different from hers, and I try to compartmentalize. I don't hide her, but I don't lead with her either, if that makes sense. It does, I said. She's incredible, so much like you. Sarah laughed again. She likes you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been recruited for story time. That made me smile. As I got ready to leave, I felt grateful for the day and the opportunity to spend time with both Sarah and Matilda. It was clear to me that this relationship was about building something meaningful, not just with Sarah, but with her daughter too.
Orsiki. Sarah. Some might think I was simply waiting for Dan's marriage to end so I could step in and be part of his life. And, in a way, they wouldn't be entirely wrong. I always knew Dan was a kind and thoughtful person. I understood his values and what he wanted out of life. But I also knew he needed to make his own decisions, in his own time. I couldn't interfere. I had to let things unfold naturally. And eventually they did. Dan's wife, Lara, struggled to appreciate the amazing person she had by her side. Dan deeply cared for her and worked hard to keep their relationship together, but she didn't seem to see his worth. She believed that their unconventional arrangement could work, but it created more strain than harmony. When I first met Dan, I was recently divorced, raising my daughter Matilda while juggling a demanding job. I wasn't searching for a traditional relationship, just meaningful connections. As I got to know Dan, I was struck by his kindness and his unwavering commitment to making things work in his life, even when it wasn't easy. He hoped for a future where his marriage could thrive, but over time, it became clear that his efforts were one-sided. Dan and I became close friends, and as we spent more time together, I came to understand his genuine character. He had so much love to give, but it wasn't being reciprocated in his marriage. While he was dedicated to building a future, Lara seemed more focused on chasing distractions. Dan's strength and resilience were admirable, but even the strongest people have limits. Eventually, the cracks in their relationship widened. Dan needed time to heal and reflect on what he truly wanted in life. I gave him space and supported him as a friend, knowing he would find clarity when the time was right. Now, as we spend more time together, I see how much Dan values family and stability. Matilda adores him, and he always brings a smile to her face with his thoughtful gestures. Our home feels brighter and warmer than ever, filled with laughter and joy. This feels like a new chapter for all of us. I'm taking things slowly because I want to build something meaningful, not rush into anything. But I can't help feeling that, after all the challenges, we're finally headed in the right direction.
Lara, I received a letter in the mail informing me that my marriage has officially ended. I'm single again.
Dan, it's been almost a year since my marriage to Lara ended. This past year has been a real mix of emotions for me. I was deeply hurt by Lara. She didn't fight for us at all. When I told her I couldn't stay in a marriage where she was seeing other men, she didn't do or say anything to suggest she might change to save our relationship. That made it painfully clear where I stood in her life and how unimportant I was to her. She valued me so little that she couldn't even consider altering her behavior. Starting a family wasn't on her mind. Children weren't part of her plan. I, on the other hand, wanted a family. I longed for the stability of a wife and children, a life I craved. It became clear Lara wasn't the woman for me. Divorce was inevitable. I spoke with both our families, and they understood. They quietly acknowledged Lara's behavior, and, while they hoped she would change her ways, they supported my decision to leave. Even her family wished me well. Just when I thought my life was falling apart, two people saved me. You know who I'm talking about. Every day, I thank my lucky stars for them.
Sarah, I need a full-time husband. My daughter needs a full-time father. I've got the perfect candidate in mind. My daughter has been asking if Dan is going to be her daddy. My only response so far has been, "That would be nice, wouldn't it?" She nods her head in agreement. It's time to move things along.
Dan, I've come up with a plan for the summer. a mix of travel and camping, but in a way that's comfortable for all of us. My parents own an RV, a massive vehicle I jokingly call the land yacht. My dad, ever the enthusiast for big toys, often offered to lend it to me. Until now, I never had much interest in using something so large and unwieldy. My idea of camping has always been much simpler, but I'd never gone camping with a small child before. When I divorced Lara, my father congratulated me, saying I'd finally gotten my life sorted out. Initially, his comment stung. I felt he was calling me stupid, but deep down, I knew he was glad I was moving forward, even if he expressed it in his typical blunt, dad way. My parents knew I was seeing Sarah and had even met her and her daughter Matilda once. My mom treated them like royalty, especially Matilda, showering her with treats and affection. I could tell my mother saw Matilda as the closest thing to a grandchild she might ever get from me. My father, true to form, stayed practical and straightforward. As I started planning the trip, I realized that camping with a small child required a completely different approach. My father, ever the pragmatist, insisted, "Women need to pee a lot, especially at night. They don't want to trip around in the dark and face a raccoon, or worse, a bear. Just take the damn RV and enjoy it. It's free, so what do you have to lose?" With that, the decision was made. The RV is loaded with modern conveniences, a satellite receiver, internet, and all the comforts of home. The real challenge was learning how to drive it safely. After a few practice sessions with my dad, I felt ready. When I pitched the idea to Sarah, she was hesitant, but Matilda was thrilled. We even stopped by my parents' house so they could explore the RV. My dad had it hooked up to power and water, with the air conditioner running and the slides pushed out for extra space. My mom, of course, spoiled Matilda with fresh-baked treats and showed her the bunk where she'd sleep. In mid-July, after my dad gave me his final approval that I was good to go, we hit the road. Our route would take us through Wyoming, down to Colorado, and back home. I saw this trip as a turning point, a chance to see if Sarah and I had a future together. Spending that much time together, especially with a small child, would test our compatibility. I was nervous about whether I could meet Sarah's expectations and how I would bond with Matilda. I decided to let Sarah take the lead with parenting and avoid undermining her authority as Matilda's mother. My dad rigged a car seat in the RV so Matilda could ride safely while Sarah stayed close by her side. Matilda had plenty of toys and books to keep her entertained, and we planned frequent stops for activities. Whenever we hit the road, she would usually nap, making the journey smoother. This trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a new beginning. By the end of it, we'd know whether our lives could truly blend into one.
Sarah. Oh my goodness. Matilda and I are spending our summer vacation with Dan in his parents' massive RV. What started as a camping trip has transformed into its more luxurious counterpart, RV glamping. I've never done anything like this before, but after just a few days, I must admit that having a cozy bed to sleep in at night and a proper bathroom is a real treat. Matilda absolutely loves spending time with Dan and does her best to keep him all to herself from morning until bedtime. Dan makes sure we don't spend all our time enjoying the RV's comforts. Every day he takes us out to hike or bike, keeping us active. I have a special bike seat for Matilda, but for this trip, I gladly let Dan attach it to his bike. Matilda was adamant about it anyway. The trip was full of wonderful memories. Matilda was clearly overjoyed, and so was I. I got to see a side of Dan that confirmed everything I already thought about him. He's a true gentleman, intelligent, caring, strong, thoughtful, and genuinely family-oriented. I can see it in the way he interacts with Matilda and in the way he supports me. This trip was special for me, especially the quiet evenings when Matilda was asleep, and Dan and I could enjoy some peaceful moments together. Those times deepened our bond and made me realize how much he truly cares for us. It's clear that what we share is built on mutual respect, trust, and love. When our vacation ended, I felt like I needed another one to recover. Going back to work and daycare routines was bittersweet. Matilda missed Dan, and honestly, so did I. But I reminded her that he had to work too. She seemed to understand, though she was a little sad.
Dan. The land yacht adventure was a success. After we returned the RV, I thanked my parents for letting us use it. Matilda proudly showed my mom how her bunk bed worked, lowering it and climbing up with the help of a ladder. My mom was thrilled, hinting, not so subtly, about how much she'd love having grandchildren someday. Meanwhile, my dad meticulously inspected the RV, quizzing me about everything, from cleaning the tanks to refueling. I reassured him everything was handled, just as he'd taught me. Inside, I laughed, knowing my dad would do anything for Sarah and Matilda if they ever needed it. A couple of weeks later, I suggested a day trip with Sarah. We packed up my cross-trek and set out for some hiking. Even without the RV's conveniences, we managed just fine. The day was a perfect opportunity to see if my bigger plans for us could become a reality.
Lara. It's been over a year since I last saw Dan. I've moved into a new apartment closer to work and have been casually meeting new people. Nothing serious, just trying to find balance and focus on myself. After Dan left, I started reflecting on my life. I'm still young and have plenty of time to figure things out, but losing Dan made me realize my mistakes. I regret taking Dan for granted. I thought he understood that I valued my independence and that we could coexist with minimal effort. But I see now how wrong I was. We didn't share many interests. He loved outdoor activities, while I preferred more laid-back pursuits. Even when we spent time together, I could sense that our priorities weren't aligned. I've learned a lot about myself over the past year. I'm focusing on my health, my career, and building meaningful connections. It hasn't always been easy, but I'm optimistic about what the future holds. Each day, I remind myself to appreciate the people in my life and strive to be better for them and for myself.
My plan is falling into place perfectly. I had a quiet conversation with Matilda, explaining what I intended to do and asking for her permission to propose to her mother. I also asked her if she'd want me to be her father if I did. Her answer was an emphatic yes. She was absolutely thrilled, but I explained that it had to be a surprise for her mother, so she couldn't tell her anything. Matilda was bursting with excitement, and I wondered how long she could keep the secret. To manage the anticipation, I decided to plan a hike for the weekend.
Sarah. For the past few days, Matilda has been looking at me with wide eyes and bubbling excitement. Every time she glances at me, she can't help but laugh a little. When I told her the three of us would be going on a hike on Saturday, she ran to her room to start packing. On Thursday, Dan wanted to take us to a favourite park for a picnic. When we got out of the car, Matilda grabbed Dan's hand, whispered something in his ear and giggled when he nodded in response. Then she looked at me with a grin, and I knew something was up. I had a pretty good idea of what it might be. Once we reached the picnic spot and set everything up, Matilda was practically vibrating with excitement, twirling and barely able to stay still. Dan turned to her and asked, "Do you think now's a good time?" She nodded eagerly, giggling again. I was almost certain of what was coming, and I wasn't disappointed. Dan reached into his backpack and pulled out a small box. Oh my God, he's really doing it. He dropped to one knee, took my hand, and looked straight into my eyes. "Sarah, I love you so much, and I want us to be a family, together, forever. Will you do me the honor of being my wife?" I held my breath, brimming with anticipation, and when the words finally came, they hit me just as powerfully as I'd imagined. This wasn't just a proposal to me, it was a promise to my daughter as well. We're a package deal, and Dan knew that. He'd already talked to Matilda about his plan, making her a part of it before the hike. She had been as much a part of the decision as I had. It felt like we had been courting him to be both a husband and a father, while he had been courting me to be his wife. I'd been hoping for this day ever since our camping trip in Dan's parents' motorhome. That trip confirmed for me that Dan was not only the man I wanted as my husband, but also the father I wanted for Matilda, and for the baby I was carrying. Yes, Dan jumped up and kissed me, and Matilda leaped onto us, wrapping us both in a big hug.
Dan. Did I surprise Sarah? Maybe a little, but not by much. The real surprise was on me. When Sarah said yes, I was over the moon. Life was shaping up exactly how I had hoped. Then, in a moment, it leaped forward in ways I couldn't have predicted. As we hugged and kissed, Matilda turned to Sarah and declared that she was going to start calling me Daddy. I was about to suggest packing up and sharing our happy news with Sarah's parents when Sarah announced, "I have a surprise for you." She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small white plastic object, and handed it to me. "Congratulations, Dad." I stared at it, a pregnancy test with 2 blue lines in the window. It took me a moment to register what it meant. My eyes widened, my mouth fell open, and I looked at Sarah. She nodded. "Yes, 5 weeks now, during the trip with the motorhome." I couldn't hold back. I threw myself at my fiancée and kissed her with everything I had.
18 months later, Lara. Today, as I walked through downtown, I saw Dan across the street with a woman and 2 children. I had to do a double take to make sure it was him. When I looked again, I knew it was. He was with a woman, a little girl, and they were pushing a stroller with a baby inside. The woman appeared to be expecting. About 6 months along, I guessed. They were all laughing together. The little girl, who looked around 4 or 5 years old, was holding Dan's hand. In that moment, it hit me. This could have been my life, if only I had made different choices. My life now feels like a series of fleeting moments without lasting meaning. I was happy for him, truly. But I couldn't help feeling the ache of regret. Too bad it wasn't with me.
Dan, I have to tell you that 2.5 years ago, when my sham of a marriage to Lara fell apart, I could never have predicted the path my life would take. I found what I was looking for. I found a woman I could love and who loves me back. Sarah is amazing, and she makes me incredibly happy. Along with a wife, I gained a daughter. Matilda is a force of nature. I often joke that she's nuclear-powered with no off switch. I think she enjoys having a father. My mom and dad are thrilled to have grandchildren to spoil. My dad even went so far as to modify his RV, adding proper passenger seats to secure kids' car seats facing forward. I didn't ask him to do it. He just did. My mom loves baking treats for the kids, even though the baby is only a year old and mostly babbles nonstop. Sarah is pregnant with our 3rd child. We recently bought a new, to us, house, a big, older home that I plan to renovate. Sarah is handling the design work, and I'll take care of the construction. Her dad thinks we should start our own business together. He's probably right, and after the baby is born and the dust settles, we'll make a plan. At the last family barbecue, Sarah's father and my dad had a talk, and then announced to us that when we're ready to discuss business, they have ideas and funding ready to go. I'm not sure I want them that involved, but it's something we can consider. At the end of the day, I just want to ensure I can provide for my family.
Sarah, I suppose I'll have the final word. I thank my lucky stars every single day that I found such a wonderful man. Dan is an incredible husband and father. Matilda adores him and loves him to the moon and back. Our baby, Adrian, is a year old, and both girls have their dad wrapped around their little fingers. With number 3 on the way, I have a feeling this one might be a boy. Occasionally I think about Dan's ex, Lara, and can't help but feel that her loss was my gain. How could she have been so foolish to let go of a man like him? He was willing to accept her flaws, significant ones, just to have her love in return. But she gave her attention to every other man she encountered. So reckless. Anyway, I have a family to care for and need to get back to work. Remember to focus on what truly matters to you and prioritize that above all else. Have a wonderful day.